Good evening, everyone. Welcome back again to Live with Lindsay, and I appreciate you joining us week after week. So today we're going to be talking with Stephen Goldberg, who I will introduce in just a moment. We're going to be talking about a process for solving our biggest organizational problems. And I can certainly say that from my experience, I've seen so many situations where problems are analyzed and reanalyzed, and more reports come out about how to address these problems. And then it seems that over a period of time, nothing's done, or maybe really minuscule steps, to the extent that people start to lose faith that the time they're putting into looking at how to address these problems is actually worth it. And so today, Stephen's going to be talking to us about how to better get to the bottom of those problems so we can actually solve them and move on to something else, which wouldn't that be lovely? So I'm just going to open the comments here. And if you're watching, as I always say, I'd love it if you just let me know you're here, where you're watching from, what kind of things you're hoping to learn tonight from Stephen. And so just before I bring him in, Stephen Goldberg helps companies improve the performance of their organizations. And he does that in 3 different ways. So he has a consulting and coaching service where he provides services and tools to help companies hire the right person for the job. He also provides coaching on managing employee performance to owners of small businesses so they can free themselves to work on development projects. And then third, he provides training and leadership and teamwork to first-time managers and those who have never had formal training on leadership and management. And as a result of the training and support he provides them, employees can collaborate, work autonomously, and contribute to continuous improvement initiatives. So with that, I'm going to bring Stephen in with me here this evening. So hi, Stephen.
Hello, Lindsay. Good to see you again.
Thanks for coming out here with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
really
it's nice
being able to talk about this subject.
I think it's something, like I said in the intro, that people get fed up with, right? Seeing the same problems trying to be addressed again and again without much sense of change or improvement. It starts to feel almost like your time is wasted.
Yeah. You know, what prompted me, going back to when I messaged you about having this conversation, and it was an article I read in, La Presse about the, well, it's a public problem really with the police, with the SQ. Beyond that, but they were talking about the racism within the force, specifically towards Indigenous people in the North. I think it was mainly there they were talking about it, and how the government had hired somebody to study the problem and then make recommendations. And I think he came out with 160 recommendations. And these types of things get me going. And I thought to myself, well, there's got to be a better way to address problems, because how are you going to, what are you going to do with 160 recommendations? Maybe, they're going to take the top ones and they're going to write some new laws or create some new rules and regulations, which people don't like and they fight to not follow. So, I was thinking about this, and then I thought, well, what's the best way to approach this, and how do you really solve problems? And, from my perspective, and when you look at, really creating ownership of solutions and teamwork, around teamwork, you got to get the people that are directly involved in the problem or causing the problem, where the source is, and you got to get them to discuss it in the right way, come up with their own solutions, and then have those solutions apply. And that way, the people that are actually on the front line interacting where the problem is are the ones that can take ownership of applying the solutions, and also then get others in their organizations to also come on board and embark on those solutions too, because it's not just writing recommendations. It's like you said, it's taking action on them and making sure that whoever's involved will actually do what they need to do. So a lot of it is around taking ownership of their job, of the problem. And, I'm talking about a public issue here, but it really also, I see this in small, medium-sized organizations, large companies, of course. Every company has these types of problems. And so you need a process to drive problem solving at the level where people who are creating the problems or know about the problem can come together and use the right skills and tools to come up with solutions, and then start working on applying those solutions.
And I'd also add, and I'm going to guess you'd agree with this, those affected by the problem. I think that's a step that's often missed. Your description there brought me back to my days of being a speech therapist when I was a newer graduate. And I thought my role was assess the child, figure out on your own what's going on, and give the parent as much information as you can to guide them on what to work on, right? So that might be a page of 20 recommendations to implement at school and whatnot. What I realized over time with some experience was that like you said, 160 recommendations in a report are absolutely not implementable. And a few might be, but by the time those have been implemented, things have changed such that the next recommendation might not be what you thought it would be back when you outlined it 3 months, 6 months ago. But beyond that, I wasn't spending enough time as a newer graduate trying to really understand how it impacted the client and how to adjust what I was recommending based on the client's perception of the situation and the client's needs. And so I'm speaking about speech therapy here, but I will make a parallel to make this clear in a moment how it applies to business. So for instance, I might get a child in who the parents were really worried about stuttering. And then I assess the child and I see the child's not understanding. And so I was deciding that's more important. That needs to be worked on first. But maybe I wasn't understanding because I wasn't asking that the parent was also a stutterer and they went through lots of shame because of their stuttering and, were afraid to even order at a drive-through and that it affected their job possibilities. And so for that parent, treating that first is more important. And I think by imposing my perception on the situation, I was then giving parents a list of recommendations that there was no buy-in into. And so then they weren't taking ownership of the change, but I was seeing it as they were the problem, right? For not taking the next step. Whereas really I was a big part of the problem by not including all the parties that needed to be there in the conversation. So I completely understand and identify with what you're saying here and how that influences business. Can we maybe talk about a bit though, what kind of scenarios or problems are you seeing in business that where this isn't happening? Can you give me some concrete examples?
Well, I mean, there's two types of problems I think that companies have. There's systems problems, and then there's people problems, right? Yeah. So I think it's more on the people side of it's on both, because if you have people following a certain protocol to do their job, like around the system, around the procedure, and then you bring in an outside expert, let's say in a small manufacturing company, to look at, okay, especially today with automation, right? Everybody's looking at how to automate their production. And so any change that's going to happen on the production floor in a manufacturing is going to affect directly the people that are actually doing the job. And there's going to be a lot of fear created too, right? Mm-hmm. Because they see people coming in, doing analysis of the workflow, and they get a sense that, well, things are about to change because there's these engineers coming in, there's these experts, maybe they're talking to me, but nobody's really communicated to me what's going on and how is this going to affect my job? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to shift my job? I'm not being trained on anything else. So a lot of fear can be created. And this is happening really a lot right now with the implementation of new technology of automation. So that's something that's going on. And how do you approach it to, make sure that people don't freak out and start, anticipating perhaps losing their job, especially like right now when we're in a pandemic and there's already a fear there. So it's really an approach that leadership has to take in terms of how to communicate to employees, upfront what's going on so that people know that change may be coming, but they're thinking about, it's not necessarily a threat to their job, to their livelihood. And so, it's the approach, first of all, that leadership has to take in terms of communicating with people. And then, of course, involving people in, the using their knowledge, using what they already know to access information and feed it to the experts in such a way that it's, that they feel that maybe they're part of the solution and they're not just going to be replaced by a machine or something. So that's maybe one practical way that I've seen, people being affected. And so, it's sometimes it's better. And, one approach in terms of creating more ownership from people in terms of what's going to be implemented once the experts come up with their recommendations and the organization starts to make the changes is to, form teams of people that are, part of that are working with the experts. So it's not just, the experts themselves, but you actually form problem-solving teams. And this could be for both, things like automating processes, but it could also be for the people side of problems, like, especially now, like I wrote an article recently about this. People are working from home still quite a bit. The government, I heard, is trying to get companies to bring at least 30% of the workforce back to just help rejuvenate the economy, right? Especially in the downtown core. But it's still, I don't think, really happening that much. And so how do you create this feeling of, maintenance of relationships between coworkers while you're working, remotely? And so here's an example of how a company can form discussion groups of employees to have them come up with solutions to this type of problem, propose them to management, and then implement some of these recommendations,
Yeah. So if for anyone watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, how you've seen this impacting organizations, this lack of, I guess, a more holistic way of going about solving problems. I know that for myself, so when I started consulting to First Nations organizations, they have a very ground up approach or bottom up approach of initiatives always. So it's not necessarily always frontline employees who maybe think of the initiative. It might be someone who comes up with something and that gets reflected on and eventually implemented. Sometimes it's not them who initiate it, but there's always, or almost always, a process of go back to the people impacted, get their feedback, and then revise. And then, then go up to the next layer. So maybe to middle managers and get their feedback, because the way they're impacted by this new initiative is going to be different from the way the frontline people are involved, and then go even higher. And so it's not all directives stem from senior leadership, but there's a process of ensuring that So not that everyone agrees necessarily, because not everyone's going to agree, but there's a process of, like you said, making sure people feel like they're part of the solution, so that they feel like they have had their say, their concerns have been addressed. And then I find once, so that's a lengthier process than what I see down here. But what I see is that once implemented, you don't have nearly as much resistance and sabotaging almost to deal with, because
Good word, sabotaging, because
yeah,
that happens quite a bit.
yeah. So I'm curious then, what do you think is the biggest barrier to organizations using more of an approach like this, where they're having, whether it's focus groups or whatever you call them, of the
Well, I
people
call
more
them
impacted?
problem-solving teams,
Okay.
I mean,
Problem
every
solving.
day a business owner wakes up and you deal with problems, and the more that you can get employees to solve your problems, and you mentioned this in when you presented me, it's part of my, how I define myself, what I do. The more that business owners can delegate, if you want to use that word, problem solving, down to as far down to those that are affected by the problem as possible, the more the business owner can work on or free themselves to work on growth, to work on development, all, innovation, all the things, just take the time to plan more strategically, which, as a business grows, you need that space to be able to do that. So, that's really the obstacles to do that is, first of all, the mindset of the leader, and being, having that perspective that, hey, my people can solve problems. The other obstacle is time. If everybody's just doing their tasks every day and fighting to get their tasks done, then you may think that there's not enough time for them to do it, to work in teams to do this type of problem solving. But if people are busy putting out fires every day, I always use that analogy of the fire chief. What does he do when he's not fighting a fire? With his employees, with his team, he's training them. They're practicing putting out fires, and so when the fire actually happens, they're so skilled, and they know what to do, and they're ready to act and listen to the commands based on what's going on, where the fire is spreading. And that's essential, that they have that kind of collaboration, right? So time is a big obstacle. The mindset of people to participate, right? So you need to have you need to train people. And this is kind of like where we both come in, or you come in a lot, on providing those skills for people to collaborate together, to communicate well together. So when you don't have those skills, that's an obstacle too.
Yeah.
And then the skills to facilitate these types of problem solving. Not that it's so complex, it's actually quite easy. Things like brainstorming, there's different techniques that once you train a facilitator on how to facilitate these groups, it's really easy. And, just training people on these types of facilitation problem solving techniques is another obstacle, because most people haven't had these types of training, especially in smaller type companies.
Yeah. And I'd add too, so you talked about how that then frees up the business owner to work on more strategic business goals. I think it also gives more satisfaction to the employees to feel that they have more of a voice, or more of a say of the direction of what they're working on. Because the number of people I have spoken to who have said to me, I was in this position, I loved my job, I loved it, I worked on this great project, it was so fun, but then I realized I'm never going to have anything more challenging than this. This is it. There's no there's nowhere for me to go from here without perhaps moving to a higher position, which they weren't necessarily interested in. They liked the more hands-on work, but like the complex projects. And my gut is there are ways that organizations could, by involving people more in the process, identify things that those people, those valuable employees who have been around for years and years and have all this skill and knowledge and are jumping ship because they just don't feel challenged enough. That's a huge
Absolutely.
loss of talent, you know?
Absolutely. That's a big issue. I mean, people are very mobile today, especially if they've kept current with their skill set. The knowledge worker is very in demand, and more and more companies need to find ways to retain their employees, and keeping the work interesting and challenging so people feel that they're contributing, that they're growing. And you can even tie rewards into that. If you create what we call improvement initiatives that teams can take on or individuals can take on, you could tie an ROI on it. You could actually say, well, if we achieve this, it's going to, produce this kind of monetary reward, and then you could tie that into a bonus for them. So, you can, even though you don't, promote somebody to a higher position, like a management position, you could pay them more on performance, and by giving them projects to work on, either individually or as a team. And this will help retain them and keep the job interesting and challenging, like you said.
Yeah. Well, I think that sense of purpose, like when I look at my parents' generation, not to say that I think they didn't like what they did, but I think they probably would have stayed there regardless, just because that's what people did in their generation, right? You got a job, you stayed there long term. And in fact, I mean, I graduated in 2002 from my master's and also had that vision, right, of I'll have an employer or two. And so even back then, that was kind of a bit more the norm. But I think that sense of purpose in younger generations is so important to them with good reason, right? And so I like what you're saying. That really resonated with me. Like I've had phases in my career where I felt a bit stifled in terms of where I could go. And I knew I didn't want to get into a managerial position because I liked what I was doing. But had somebody said to me, if you can find initiatives that will, improve the way we're doing things, which was very much of interest to me, and as a bonus, you'll get extra money, I would have done it without the extra money. But the extra money would have been a double motivation it would have been enough to keep me really interested and engaged, I think. So I think that's a great tip.
Yeah, I know somebody who came from Europe, actually Russia, and she had a law degree. She has a law degree in Russia, but she couldn't practice here. So she went and took a course in human resources, and she lives in Ontario, and it took her over a year to get a job. And she was really stressed about it, but finally she got a job. And, you would think, and she's been on the job for under 2 years now, and you think, hey, after going through whatever she did, she'd be happy. Well, I just found out she's looking to change job because she feels like she's reached her limit, and she feels like she's babysitting. It's a manufacturing company, and she has to babysit these people that come to her with these ridiculous complaints about this worker and about having to do this, or they're at, it's a unionized environment, and they look for any excuse. So it's like, managing children in this case.
Right.
So even though there's stability, there's, that she didn't have before, there's good pay, she's ready to jump ship just for something more challenging and to grow, challenge means you feel like you're growing. You're not just doing the same thing every day.
Yeah. And I think what you said about that sense of ownership, I feel that a lot. So you've talked about a few ways that, to give employees more ownership in terms of having them more involved in the discussions, your initiative in terms of finding new initiatives to better the way things are being done and have a bonus attached. Do you have any other suggestions on how leaders can encourage people to have more ownership? Because it sounds like the example you just shared of the people she's babysitting, it sounds like a group of people who are not taking a lot of ownership for what they're doing.
Well, I guess it comes down to each individual because, I look at employees or people having different levels of maturity. Mm-hmm. And some people, you could just give them total responsibility and they'll run with it and they'll take complete charge of their jobs. If you look at a job, when you hire somebody, I do this exercise. I used to do it more when I would meet face-to-face with business owners, called the U Incorporated. And the idea is that each employee, including the business owner, is like a business. And your assets are your skills, your knowledge, all these attributes that you have. And every day you go to work with your inventory of assets and you perform work, and in return you get benefits, your pay, whatever other benefits you get. And so the more you use your assets, the more potential you have to get a return in terms of money and benefits, right? Which is what we all want when we go to work. But if you're a person that comes to the job, comes to the table with this notion that that doesn't understand how to assume full responsibility for what's going on in their life, their inventory of assets can't be used properly. Even if they have a lot of skills, there's this attitude that keeps them from really delivering what they could if they freed themselves of this negative thinking, of blaming. So I call that a maturity level, right? And so you have to know as a leader, what is the maturity level of each of my employees? And sometimes we hire people and they sound great and we check their references, but then they come and then we realize that they're not all that they made out to be, right, or that we thought they were. It's easy to get deceived. We all have been deceived in hiring somebody, and sometimes overjoyed as well that they surprise us with being even a greater performer than we thought. So it's really hard to know just through that process of interviewing or whatever. So it's about getting to understand each person and then helping them. And this is where leaders that become interested in learning how to be coaches can coax people to become more responsible, become more mature, take fully charge of their jobs. And so you have to understand each person and where they're at. Are they at the adolescent level? Are they the fully mature level, which most people aren't, and trying to get them, through that coaching, through that challenging them to that higher level of behavior. Because no matter how great a skill set you have, if your attitude and behavior aren't aligned in terms of wanting to take full responsibility and take ownership of your job, you can't really use that skill set to the fullest, Yeah. So you do that through, clarifying what you expect from people on the job, and get them to say what they're going to commit to, and then hold them accountable to that, and coach them along the way.
So I think that's powerful.
Yeah.
That coaching. So what I was thinking of as you were saying that was parenting, actually, and how, because frankly, I mean, there are so many parallels between raising children and managing a team. I'm not saying it's the same thing at all. And I only have 2 children, so it's certainly not like managing a team, but I think there are parallels in terms of how to motivate people and how to teach things and how to, all the interpersonal skills needed to do it effectively. And what I was thinking was that, I don't parent just 2 children the same exact way, because there are nuances in the strengths and weaknesses of my kids. There's nuances in how our personalities mesh or clash in certain ways. So I have to watch certain things in myself more with one child than the other, because one of us are more similar and tend to butt heads a bit more. And just having to really understand, when you're trying to get someone from A to B, where are they now in that skill, and what is going to drive them to be able to improve, may be very different. And so I think that coaching approach you're sharing is, being able to do so, I think, is a big marker of being a very aware leader. Whether you're doing it perfectly or not, just being aware of that notion that what works for one doesn't work for all is a huge key.
Yeah. And the leader actually, just like a parent, like you're saying, I mean, kids become like their parents in a lot of ways, even though each parent is really individual and unique. I mean, they are, they are who they are, but they learn a lot, they emulate a lot of the behaviors that they see from their parents. Just look at diet. If kids grow up on junk food, they're going to maybe not question that and teach the same thing to their children, in terms of diet. So a leader needs to walk the talk. If you want your employees to take fully responsibility, well, what are your responsibilities as a leader, and are you assuming them? Are you taking time to give feedback to employees? Are you sitting down with them and being able to listen to them and not listen to their complaints or whatever, and not just tell them that they're wrong, but empathize with them, and then coach them on maybe coming up with a solution to whatever it is they're complaining about. So it's not, so they take responsibility for it. So what does a leader how do they need to act and behave that they want their employees to follow suit? So it's not what you say, it's how you are, it's what you do.
Yeah. So that modeling, I've seen that many times, where somebody in a management position, they're very supportive. They talk about being very supportive to their team, and they're very well intentioned, but inevitably, so I think sometimes they're trying to give more of themselves than they can. And so what inevitably happens is that initiatives get dropped. So for instance, if there's an initiative to look at how to improve, I don't know, let's say communication within the team, it's all planned out, and then nothing really gets done because the person didn't actually have the time it wasn't their top priority. Nothing really happens. Or there's, a decision that, now that we're remote, we'll do weekly meetings. The manager will do weekly meetings with each employee, just a brief touch base to see how people are doing, but then their schedule gets too busy and it's canceled all the time. And so it's sending messages, despite the well-meaning intent behind it, not holding oneself accountable for making hard decisions, whether that is telling your employee you can't connect that often, or saying no to something else so that you can, but I see where that has such an impact on the trust, I guess, and how much of themselves people will give to their roles. Because if the leader's not taking enough ownership, then why would you? Not to say that's okay, but
yeah. And one of the problems with managing in small businesses is that often managers are promoted to a leadership management role and aren't given the time to actually manage or lead.
Yeah.
They're still, like take a sales manager, and I've seen this often where a great salesperson is promoted to sales manager, and they don't know really how to be a sales manager.
Yeah.
The owner thinks, well, they're the best salesperson, let them now teach the other people how to sell. But maybe that manager's not a great teacher. He's a great salesperson, And that's really what he wants to do, but he's given this authority. He's not given the time. He's still expected to go out and sell to major accounts, and he doesn't have the time.
It's like one foot in, one foot out.
He doesn't even understand what his management role is, because they haven't really sat down and talked about it and been supported in actually assuming those responsibilities. And that's really a big obstacle or big problem in smaller, medium-sized businesses. And then when you get into bigger businesses, then the manager becomes more of a just manager of systems, of procedures, of scheduling. So they have the time, but they're not maybe assuming the leadership part of the management role. Which is
well, and a lot of problems then go to HR, right? And so they're tangentially involved, depending on what kind of an issue we're talking about, but they're not necessarily as tightly involved in those kind of situations, I guess, as in a smaller business.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about common problems, but of course there are great organizations that do great things and don't fall, but everybody does have problems and does have situations where they could be better at whatever they're doing.
Absolutely. I think no matter what size type of organization you are, I mean, I look at myself here, and there's just, myself, an employee, and somebody on contract, and there's still problems. It's not perfect, so, and obviously that as it grows, those problems multiply. And so the message here is not so much, that's terrible, but more to bring awareness around where the problems are and what to do to make that easier. And I like, what you're saying here about helping employees have more ownership. I think that's what people are seeking. I'm not saying everyone, but I feel like that's what people want. They want a bit more independence, not full, I get to call all the shots if you're not in a senior leadership position, but just to feel like they have a say somewhat in some little piece of some decisions.
And going back to what is the process? I mean, there's a really practical process that any size business can implement.
Okay.
And it starts with here's a kind of a picture of it. Let's say you have a company of 30 employees. 30 to 50 employees. So the owner would say, I'm listening to what Stephen and Lindsay are talking about. I'd like to do this. So you could start by forming a what we call a steering team or steering committee, maybe made up of your key managers or key employees. Could be 4 or 5 people. And you sit down and you make a list of problems that are affecting the organization, that may be affecting just about everybody in the company, and could be soft problems, technical, whatever problem. Maybe start with the soft problems, and then prioritize those. Take the top 1 or 2, form a team of employees. From your steering team, you name a champion, somebody who's going to follow this process.
Or nothing happens.
And then he forms what we call an ad hoc team. Okay. And this ad hoc team, it could be made of people from different departments, again, maybe 5 to 7 employees. And then you have a facilitator, and this is where the training comes in on how to facilitate. It's not difficult. And teach the problem-solving techniques. Again, very simple. And you have a facilitator that understands that, and you walk the team through problem solving to come up with solutions. So you got to look at the causes and narrow it down to the core cause and come up with solutions, and then with a recommended plan of action. So often where it dies is people come up with solutions. You remember like the suggestion box in companies. And that cartoon where you see the person putting in a suggestion and then there's a garbage pail and it goes right through. So that still happens, maybe digitally now, but people come up with solutions to problems and nothing happens. So the champion's role is to get, and the facilitator is to make sure that whatever solutions are the best solutions, they get put into a one-page recommended plan of action. That goes back to your steering committee. The steering committee says, yeah, this is great. Let's implement that. And then the plan of action that the team came up with should include, who would be the ones to implement this. And of course, you elaborate on that. And then the champion makes sure that, this gets implemented. So what I'm saying is that you need some kind of a structure, not just to go at it and say, okay, this is a good idea. Let's start forming a few employees together and having them solve problems. You need to think of this process and how you're going to sustain it so it just doesn't die like many things do that have good intentions.
Yeah. Well, and what I like in what you've described is that there's a clear process, but there's also clearly defined roles and responsibilities as you're going through it, which I think also lends to accountability, right? Because I've seen so many times where, at the end, something is decided and then, it's discussed who's going to do that. And it's sort of concluded, okay, we'll all work on this. And of course, inevitably, everyone gets busy. Nobody feels the pressure of having their name called at the next meeting and asked why nothing has happened because 10 people were informally, voluntold that they would be involved. And so I like that there's really a lot of clarity around who's doing what and what, identifying the next step of doing that, right? Boiling it down. And I feel like that's how change actually happens over time. And I think sometimes people just drown in the aspirations of like,
or they drown in meetings.
Say that.
Executed meetings is another demotivator and big obstacle to getting people to participate well and come up with solutions and get those.
I am absolutely somebody who goes nuts in meetings that are repetitions of previous meetings again and again. It drives me bonkers because I just like to. I'm action oriented and I don't mind slowing down to reflect on things. But once we've reflected and decided, unless there's some new information that's changed, COVID's happened, we need to realign. Yeah. At some point, let's not have a meeting. Let's do something. And then let's meet when that's done. So,
But meetings can be really inefficient and, just improving the efficiencies of meetings, following. So like I said, with the problem solving process, there's protocols to managing meetings that companies can just improve productivity so much just by putting in these protocols and following that.
I love that. So I actually just about died last week when somebody posted on LinkedIn that they spend, I can't quite recall, but something like 6 hours a day in meetings. And I thought, wow, how do you actually get anything done? But that's in their organization. That's kind of the norm and virtually now to boot, right? So not only are you not having a lot of time to move anything that's not sort of done in a team forward, but it's exhausting to sit 6 hours a day. So I think companies need to be really careful, particularly nowadays with people being virtual, how like you say, to have that kind of a process, I think just makes more efficient yet worthwhile, Yeah.
I mean, virtual meetings can be productive as well, but you need you need the same type of protocols.
Yes.
They're not as good, I don't think, obviously. You don't get the same sense of, communication, the body language. You don't get that, same feeling that you do when you're in a room with somebody and you could actually, I don't know. You know what I mean.
Read the room. So I said to somebody earlier today that I was giving a training right before COVID, and I said something, and I had no idea, but I hit a nerve on something that was going on within the organization, and I didn't know what it was, but I could read. There was just this glacial tone that covered the room the minute the words came out of my mouth that I could feel. So then I could address it with them, right? To kind of get to the bottom of, okay, so what's going on here? What do we need to talk about in order for you to be able to implement some of the things we're talking about? I can't feel that the same way virtually, so it certainly is challenging, but yeah.
Are we taking any questions? Are there any questions?
So people usually go ahead with questions. There's no questions here, so usually I take them as we go. So I guess the next thing is just if you want to share where people can connect with you.
Sure. Well, my website, or my YouTube channel. I publish a video every week, and on my blog section of my website, I publish an article coincides with the video. So you can connect with me through my website, and there is actually a pop-up to request a free consultation, and that'll bring you to a sign-up form, and then you could link to a meeting request.
Okay, so I apologize for that sound. I was just pulling up your YouTube channel. So there is Stephen's YouTube channel here, youtube.com/user/Optimus Performance.
Yeah,
and his website.
Also, some forms and worksheets, templates for free that
Awesome.
people can download, like a job description template. Talk about employee accountability. You need to make sure that the role is clear, and using like a job description as a tool, not just as a procedure. Oh, we have to have job description, but great management tool when used properly. And I have a template for that. Really simple tool. I believe in simple things. A goal planning worksheet. It's amazing how we think about goals, but when you write them down, it's very powerful, and you plan it out. It's really good practice, and you could download that and a bunch of other stuff as well from my website and another location where there's links in the description of my videos for that as well.
Okay, awesome. So optimusperformance.ca is his website where you can go get those free documents. And I know you're also on LinkedIn. People can connect with you there. Sure. So yeah, thanks for your time and coming to chat with us tonight. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Hopefully people found this valuable and got some insight into what they can do to improve ownership of work by employees.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so just to wrap up with everyone, if you're watching, you can also go to my website, lindsaylapaquette.com/podcast, and sign up to get notifications of the new episodes of the Workplace Communication Podcast as they come out. And we will be taking a break now until January. So I was going to say taking December off. I'm not taking the month off. I'm just going to not do lives in December. I figure everyone's going to be busy with the holidays and give everyone a break. And so we will be back January 6th at 6 p.m. to talk about storytelling. So I hope you'll join us then. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Bye-bye.